Explore and evaluate. Will this activity or effort make the highest possible contribution towards my goal? 2. Eliminate. Ask the killer question. If I didn't already own this, how much would I spend to buy it? This usually does the trick. In other words, it's not enough to simply determine which activities and efforts don't make the highest possible contribution. You still have to actively eliminate those that do not. 3. Execute. Once you've figured out which activities and efforts to keep, the ones that make your highest level of contribution, you need a system to make executing your intentions as effortless as possible. Today I will be reading to you my highlights of Essentialism, the Disciplined Pursuit of Less, written by Greg McKeown. Quote, "Is this the very most important thing I should be doing with my time and resources right now?" Unquote. If he couldn't answer a definite yes, then he would refuse the request. There were no negative repercussions to his experiment. His manager didn't chastise him. His colleagues didn't resent him. Quite the opposite, because he was left only with projects that were meaningful to him and actually valuable to the company, they began to respect and value his work more than ever. The basic value proposition of Essentialism? Only once you give yourself permission to stop trying to do it all, to stop saying yes to everyone, can you make your highest contribution toward the things that really matter. Have you ever found yourself stretched too thin? Have you ever felt both overworked and underutilized? Have you ever found yourself majoring in minor activities? Do you ever feel busy but not productive? Like you're always in motion but never getting anywhere? If you answered yes to any of these, the way out is the way of the essentialist. Dieter's design criteria can be summarized by a characteristically succinct principle captured in just 3 German words: weniger aber besser. The English translation is less but better. A more fitting definition of essentialism would be hard to come by. Essentialism is not about how to get more things done, it's about how to get the right things done. It doesn't mean just doing less for the sake of less either. It's about making the wisest possible investment of your time and energy in order to operate at your highest point of contribution by doing only what is essential. Essentialism is a disciplined, systematic approach for determining where our highest point of contribution lies, then making execution of those things almost effortless. If you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. What would happen if we could figure out the one thing you could do that would make the highest contribution? I asked him. He responded sincerely, "That is the question." As it turns out, many intelligent, ambitious people have perfectly legitimate reasons to have trouble answering this question. One reason is that in our society we are punished for good behavior, saying no, and rewarded for bad behavior, saying yes. The pursuit of success can be a catalyst for failure. Put another way, success can distract us from focusing on the essential things that produce success in the first place. We are unprepared in part because for the first time the preponderance of choice has overwhelmed our ability to manage it. We have lost our ability to filter what is important and what isn't. Psychologists call this decision fatigue. The more choices we are forced to make, the more the quality of our decisions deteriorates. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life of others expected of me. This requires not just haphazardly saying no, but purposefully, deliberately, and strategically eliminating the non-essentials, and not just getting rid of the obvious time wasters, but cutting out some really good opportunities as well. 1. Explore and evaluate. Will this activity or effort make the highest possible contribution towards my goal? 2. Eliminate. Ask the killer question. If I didn't already own this, how much would I spend to buy it? This usually does the trick. In other words, it's not enough to simply determine which activities and efforts don't make the highest possible contribution. You still have to actively eliminate those that do not. 3. Execute. Once you've figured out which activities and efforts to keep, the ones that make your highest level of contribution, you need a system to make executing your intentions as effortless as possible. Essentialism is about creating a system for handling the wardrobe of our lives. This is not a process you undertake once a year, once a month, or even once a week, like organizing your wardrobe. It is a discipline you apply each and every time you are faced with a decision about whether to say yes or whether to politely decline. It's a method for making the tough trade-off between lots of good things and a few really great things. It's about learning how to do less but better so you can achieve the highest possible return on every precious moment of your life. Step 1. Explore. Discerning the trivial many from the vital few. Whereas non-essentialists commit to everything or virtually everything without actually exploring, essentialists systematically explore and evaluate a broad set of options before committing to any. Because they will commit and go big on one or two ideas or activities, they deliberately explore more options at first to ensure that they pick the right one later. If we search for a good opportunity, then we will find scores of pages for us to think about and work through. Instead, we can conduct an advanced search and ask 3 questions. What do I feel deeply inspired by? And what am I particularly talented at? And what meets a significant need in the world? Naturally, there won't be as many pages to view, but this is the point of the exercise. We aren't looking for a plethora of good things to do. We are looking for our highest level of contribution, the right thing, the right way, at the right time. Step 2. Eliminate. Cutting out the trivial many. To eliminate non-essentials means saying no to someone, often. It means pushing against social expectations. To do it well takes courage and compassion. So eliminating the non-essentials isn't just about mental discipline, it's about the emotional discipline necessary to say no to social pressure. We can't choose to do everything. The real question is not how can we do it all, it is who will get to choose what we do and don't do. Remember, when we forfeit our right to choose, someone else will choose for us. Step 3. Execute. Removing obstacles and making execution effortless. Instead of forcing execution, essentialists invest the time they have saved into creating a system for removing obstacles and making execution as easy as possible. Choose. The invincible power of choice. While we may not always have control over our options, we always have control over how we choose among them. The essentialist doesn't just recognize the power of choice, he celebrates it. The essentialist knows that when we surrender our right to choose, we give others not just the power, but also the explicit permission to choose for us. Discern the unimportance of practically everything. Working hard is important, but more effort does not necessarily yield more results. Less but better does. Most people have heard of the Pareto Principle, the idea introduced as far back as the 1790s by Wilfredo Pareto, that 20% of our efforts produce 80% of results. In the Tao of Warren Buffett, Mary Buffett and David Clark explain, quote, Warren decided early in his career it would be impossible for him to make hundreds of right investment decisions, so he decided that he would invest only in the businesses that he was absolutely sure of, and then bet heavily on them. He owes 90% of his wealth to just 10 investments. Sometimes what you don't do is just as important as what you do. Unquote. In short, he makes big bets on the essential few investment opportunities and says no to the many merely good ones. A non-essentialist thinks almost everything is essential. An essentialist thinks almost everything is non-essential. An essentialist takes the time to explore all of his options. The extra investment is justified because some things are so much more important that they repay the effort invested in finding those things tenfold. An essentialist, in other words, discerns more so he can do less. Trade-off. Which problem do I want? The reality is, saying yes to any opportunity by definition requires saying no to several others. A non-essentialist approaches every trade-off by asking, how can I do both? Essentialists ask the tougher question, but ultimately more liberating question: which problem do I want? An essentialist makes trade-offs deliberately. She acts for herself rather than waiting to be acted upon. As economist Thomas Sowell wrote, "There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs." Trade-offs represent a significant opportunity. By forcing us to weigh both options and strategically select the best one for us, we significantly increase our chance of achieving the outcome we want. Essentialists see trade-offs as an inherent part of life, not as an inherently negative part of life. Instead of asking, "What do I have to give up?" they ask, "What do I want to go big on?" Explore. Discern the vital few from the trivial many. Because essentialists will commit and go big on only the vital few ideas or activities, they explore more options at first to ensure they pick the right one later. Essentialists spend as much time as possible exploring, listening, debating, questioning, and thinking. But their exploration is not an end in itself. The purpose of the exploration is to discern the vital few from the trivial many. Escape. The perks of being unavailable. We need space to escape in order to discern the essential few from the trivial many. Unfortunately, in our time-starved era, we don't get that space by default, only by design. One leader I worked with admitted to staying with a company 5 years too long. Why? Because he was so busy in the company, he didn't take time to decide whether he should be with the company. The demands of each day kept him from really stepping back to get perspective. While non-essentialists automatically react to the latest idea, jump on the latest opportunity, or respond to the latest email, essentialists choose to create the space to explore and ponder. I blocked off 8 hours a day to write, from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., 5 days a week. The basic rule was no email, no calls, no appointments, and no interruptions until after 1 p.m. I didn't always achieve it, but the discipline made a big difference. I set my email automatic replies to explain that I was in monk mode until after the book was complete. It is difficult to overstate how much freedom I found in this approach. By creating space to explore, think, and write, I not only got my book done faster, but gained control over how I spent the rest of my time. Today, everyone waiting around in an airport or a waiting room is glued to their technology tools of choice. Of course, nobody likes to be bored, but by abolishing any chance of being bored, we have also lost the time we used to have to think and process. Twice a year, during the busiest and most frenetic time in the company's history, Bill Gates still created time and space to seclude himself for a week and do nothing but read articles. His record is 112, and books, study technology, and think about the bigger picture. Look. See what really matters. In that instance, Efron recalled, I realized that journalism was not just about regurgitating the facts, but about figuring out the point. It wasn't enough to know the who, what, when, and where. You had to understand what it meant and why it mattered. We know instinctively that we cannot explore every single piece of information we encounter in our lives. Discerning what is essential to explore requires us to be disciplined in how we scan and filter all the competing and conflicting facts, options, and opinions constantly vying for our attention. Essentialists are powerful observers and listeners. Knowing that the reality of trade-offs means they can't possibly pay attention to everything, they listen deliberately for what is not being explicitly stated. Non-essentialists listen too, but they listen while preparing to say something. They get distracted by extraneous noise. They hyper-focus on inconsequential details. They hear the loudest voice, but they get the wrong message. In their eagerness to react, they miss the point. One of the most obvious and yet powerful ways to become a journalist of our own lives is simply to keep a journal. For the last 10 years now, I have kept a journal using a counterintuitive yet effective method. It is simply this: I write less than I feel like writing. Typically, when people start to keep a journal, they write pages the first day. Then by the second day, the prospect of writing so much is daunting, and they procrastinate or abandon the exercise. So apply the principle of less but better to your journal. Restrain yourself from writing more until daily journaling has become a habit. Anyone who has watched skilled politicians being interviewed knows how well trained they can be in not answering the question being asked. Evading hard questions can be tempting for us all. Often it's easier to give a vague blanket answer rather than to summon up the facts and information required to give a thoughtful, informed answer. Yet evasiveness only sends us down a non-essential spiral of further vagueness and misinformation. Clarifying the question is a way out of that cycle. Play. Embrace the wisdom of your inner child. The majority of us were not formally taught how to play when we were children. We picked it up naturally and instinctively. Then as we get older, something happens. We are introduced to the idea that play is trivial, play is a waste of time, play is unnecessary, play is childish. Unfortunately, many of these negative messages come from the very place where imaginative play should be most encouraged, not stifled. The word school is derived from the Greek word skole, meaning leisure. Yet our modern school system, born in the Industrial Revolution, has removed the leisure and much of the pleasure out of learning. Play has the power to significantly improve everything from personal health to relationships to education to organizations' ability to innovate. Play, he says, leads to brain plasticity, adaptability, and creativity. As he succinctly puts it, nothing fires up the brain like play. When we play, we are engaged in the purest expression of our humanity, the truest expression of our individuality. Is it any wonder that often the times we feel most alive, those that make up our best memories, are memories of play? Stress increases the activity in the part of the brain that monitors emotions, the amygdala, while reducing the activity in the part responsible for cognitive function, the hippocampus. The result being simply that we really can't think clearly. I have seen play reverse these effects in my own children. When they are stressed and things feel out of control, I get them to draw. When they do, the change is almost immediate. The stress melts away and their ability to explore is regained. Sleep. Protect the asset. The best asset we have for making a contribution to the world is ourselves. If we underinvest in ourselves, and by that I mean our minds, our bodies, and our spirits, we damage the very tool we need to make our highest contribution. One of the most common ways people, especially ambitious, successful people, damage this asset is through a lack of sleep. For a type A personality, it is not hard to push oneself hard. Pushing oneself to the limit is easy. The real challenge for the person who thrives on challenges is not to work hard. After reading a sleep study where some participants were required to sleep only 20 minutes every 4 hours around the clock, I tried it out. It was bearable for a while, but I soon found out that while you can technically survive on this schedule of sleep, it has its drawbacks. For example, while I was technically awake, my brain was just barely functioning. It was harder to think, plan, prioritize, or see the bigger picture. It was hard to make decisions or choices, and nearly impossible to discern the essential from the trivial. While there are clearly people who can survive on fewer hours of sleep, I found that most of them are just so used to being tired they have forgotten what it really feels like to be fully rested. The way of the non-essentialist is to see sleep as yet another burden on one's already overextended, overcommitted, busy but not always productive life. Essentialists instead see sleep as necessary for operating at high levels of contribution more of the time. In K. Anders Ericsson's famous study of violinists, popularized by Malcolm Gladwell as the 10,000 hour rule, Anders found that the best violinists spend more time practicing than the merely good students. His finding supports essentialist logic by showing that mastery takes focused and deliberate effort, and indeed it's encouraging to learn that excellence is within our sphere of influence, rather than a blessing bestowed only on the most naturally gifted. But it also comes dangerously close to encouraging the non-essentialist mindset of, I have to do it all. The pernicious myth that can lead people to justify spending longer and longer hours working with diminishing returns. That is, until we look at a less well-known finding from the same study, that the second most important factor differentiating the best violinists from the good violinists was actually sleep. The best violinists slept an average of 8.6 hours in every 24-hour period, about an hour longer than average. Over the period of a week, they also spent an average of 2.8 hours napping in the afternoon, about 2 hours longer than the average. Sleep, the authors of the study concluded, allowed these top performers to regenerate so that they could practice with greater concentration. So yes, while they practiced more, they also got more out of those hours by practicing because they were better rested. While we sleep, our brains are hard at work encoding and restructuring information. Therefore, when we wake up, our brains may have made new neural connections, thereby opening up a broader range of solutions to problems, literally overnight. Even a single REM, or rapid eye movement cycle, enhanced the integration of unassociated information. Even a brief period of deep sleep, in other words, helps us make the kinds of new connections that allow us to better explore our world. We have been talking about how to explore and evaluate options in order to discern the essential few from the trivial many, mediocre or even just good. By definition, this is a process of prioritization. It includes the challenge of filtering options that at first glance all look important. Yet as the logic of an essentialist explains, in reality there are only a few things of exceptional value, with almost everything else being of far less importance. The problem with being sleep-deprived is that it compromises our ability to tell the difference, and thus our precious ability to prioritize. Sleep will enhance your ability to explore, make connections, and do less but better throughout your waking hours. Select. The power of extreme criteria. The key is to put the decision to an extreme test. If we feel total and utter conviction to do something, then we say yes, Derek style. Anything less gets a thumbs down. Or as a leader at Twitter once put it to me, if the answer isn't a definite yes, then it should be a no. It is a succinct summary of a core essentialist principle, and one that is critical to the process of exploration. You can think of this as the 90% rule, and it's one you can apply to just about every decision or dilemma. As you evaluate an option, think about the single most important criterion for that decision, and then simply give the option a score between 0 and 100. If you rate it any lower than 90%, then automatically change the rating to 0 and simply reject it. This way you avoid getting caught up in indecision, or worse, getting stuck with the 60s or 70s. One executive team I worked with had at one time identified 3 criteria for deciding what projects to take on. But over time, they had become more and more indiscriminate, and eventually the company's portfolio of projects seemed to share only the criterion that a customer had asked them to do it. As a result, the morale on the team had plummeted, and not simply because team members were overworked and overwhelmed from having taken on too much. It was also because no project ever seemed to justify itself, and there was no greater sense of purpose. Worse, it now became difficult to distinguish themselves in the marketplace because their work, which had previously occupied a unique and profitable niche, had become so general. Only by going through the work of identifying extreme criteria were they able to get rid of the 70 and 80% that were draining their time and resources and start focusing on the most interesting work that best distinguished them in the marketplace. Furthermore, this system empowered employees to choose the projects on which they could make their highest contribution. Where they had once been at the mercy of what felt like capricious management decisions, they now had a voice. If it isn't a clear yes, then it's a clear no. Here's a simple systematic process you can use to apply selective criteria to opportunities that come your way. First, write down the opportunity. Second, write down a list of 3 minimum criteria the options would need to pass in order to be considered. Third, write down a list of 3 ideal or extreme criteria the options would need to pass in order to be considered. By definition, if the opportunity doesn't pass the first set of criteria, the answer is obviously no. But if it still also doesn't pass 2 of your 3 extreme criteria, the answer still is a no. If we search for a good career opportunity, our brain will serve up scores of pages to explore and work through. Instead, why not conduct an advanced search and ask 3 questions? What am I deeply passionate about? And what taps my talent? And what meets a significant need in the world? Naturally, there won't be as many pages to view, but that is the point of the exercise. We aren't looking for a plethora of good things to do. We are looking for the one where we can make our absolutely highest point of contribution. Eliminate. How can we cut out the trivial many? Ask the killer question. If I didn't already own this, how much would I spend to buy it? Likewise, in your life, the killer question when deciding what activities to eliminate is, if I didn't have this opportunity, what would I be willing to do to acquire it? Anytime you fail to say no to a non-essential, you are really saying yes by default. So once you have sufficiently explored your options, the question you should be asking yourself is not, what of my list of competing priorities should I say yes to? Instead, ask the essential question, what will I say no to? This is the question that will uncover your true priorities. Clarify. One decision that makes 1,000. When there's a serious lack of clarity about what the team stands for and what their goals and roles are, people experience confusion, stress, and frustration. When people don't know what the end game is, they are unclear about how to win, and as a result, they make up their own game and their own rules as they vie for the manager's favor. Instead of focusing their game and energies on making a high level of contribution, they put all their effort into games like attempting to look better than their peers, demonstrating their self-importance, and echoing their manager's every idea or sentiment. When we are unclear about our real purpose in life, in other words, when we don't have a clear sense of our goals, our aspirations, and our values, we make up our own social games. We waste time and energies on trying to look good in comparison to other people. We overvalue non-essentials like a nicer car or house, or even intangibles like the number of our followers on Twitter or the way we look on our Facebook photos. As a result, we neglect activities that are truly essential, like spending time with our loved ones, or nurturing our spirit, or taking care of our health. An essential intent, on the other hand, is both inspirational and concrete, both meaningful and measurable. Done right, an essential intent is one decision that settles 1,000 later decisions. It's like deciding you're going to become a doctor instead of a lawyer. One strategic choice eliminates a universe of other options and maps a course for the next 5, 10, or even 20 years of your life. Once the big decision is made, all subsequent decisions come into better focus. An essential intent doesn't have to be elegantly crafted. It's the substance, not the style, that counts. Instead, ask the more essential question that will inform every future decision you will ever make. If we could be truly excellent at only one thing, what would it be? A powerful essential intent inspires people partially because it is concrete enough to answer the question, how will we know when we have succeeded? Creating an essential intent is hard. It takes courage, insight, and foresight to see which activities and efforts will add up to your single highest point of contribution. It takes asking tough questions, making real trade-offs, and exercising serious discipline to cut out the competing priorities that distract us from our true intention. Yet it is worth the effort, because only with real clarity of purpose can people, teams, and organizations fully mobilize and achieve something truly excellent. Dare. The power of a graceful no. Have you ever felt a tension between what you felt was right and what someone was pressuring you to do? Have you ever felt the conflict between your internal conviction and an external action? Have you ever said yes when you meant no, simply to avoid conflict or friction? Have you ever felt too scared or timid to turn down an invitation or request from a boss, colleague, friend, neighbor, or family member for fear of disappointing them? If you have, you're not alone. Navigating these moments with courage and grace is one of the most important skills to master in becoming an essentialist, and one of the hardest. So why is it so hard in the moment to dare to choose what is essential over what is non-essential? One simple answer is we are unclear about what is essential. When this happens, we become defenseless. On the other hand, when we have strong internal clarity, it is almost as if we have a force field protecting us from the non-essentials coming at us from all directions. A second reason why it is hard to choose what is essential in the moment is as simple as an innate fear of social awkwardness. The fact is, we as humans are wired to want to get along with others. The very thought of saying no literally brings us physical discomfort. We feel guilty. We don't want to let someone down. We are worried about damaging the relationship. But these emotions muddle our clarity. They distract us from the reality of the fact that either we can say no and regret it for a few minutes, or we can say yes and regret it for days, weeks, months, or even years. The only way out of this trap is to learn to say no firmly, resolutely, and yet gracefully. Because once we do, we find not only that our fears of disappointing or angering others were exaggerated, but that people actually respect us more. Since becoming an essentialist, I have found it almost universally true that people respect and admire those with the courage of conviction to say no. A true essentialist, Peter Drucker, believed that people are effective because they say no. Non-essentialists say yes because of feelings of social awkwardness and pressure. They say yes automatically, without thinking, often in pursuit of the rush one gets from having pleased someone. Of course, the point is not to say no to all requests. The point is to say no to the non-essentials so we can say yes to the things that really matter. It is to say no, frequently and gracefully, to everything but what is truly vital. When people ask us to do something, we can confuse the request with our relationship with them. Sometimes they seem so interconnected, we forget that denying the request is not the same as denying the person. The more we think about what we are giving up when we say yes to someone, the easier it is to say no. If we have no clear sense of the opportunity cost, in other words, the value of what we are giving up, then it is especially easy to fall into the non-essential trap of telling ourselves we can get it all done. We can't. When you say no, there's usually a short-term impact on the relationship. After all, when someone asks for something and doesn't get it, his or her immediate reaction may be annoyance or disappointment or even anger. This downside is clear. The potential upside, however, is less obvious. When the initial annoyance or disappointment or anger wears off, the respect kicks in. When we push back effectively, it shows people that our time is highly valuable. It distinguishes the professional from the amateur. Essentialists accept they cannot be popular with everyone all of the time. Yes, saying no respectfully, reasonably, and gracefully can come at a short-term social cost, but part of living the way of the essentialist is realizing respect is far more valuable than popularity in the long run. Remember that a clear no can be more graceful than a vague or non-committal yes. Email is also a good way to start practicing saying no, but because it gives you the chance to draft and redraft your no to make it as graceful as possible. Things changed for her when she learned to use a new phrase. Let me check my calendar and get back to you. It gave her the time to pause and reflect and ultimately reply that she was regretfully unavailable. It enabled her to take back control of her own decisions rather than being rushed into a yes when she was asked. Remind your superiors what you would be neglecting if you said yes and force them to grapple with the trade-offs. For example, if your manager comes to you and asks you to do X, you can respond with, yes, I'm happy to make this the priority. Which of these other projects should I deprioritize to pay attention to this new project? Uncommit. Win big by cutting your losses. Sunk cost bias is the tendency to continue to invest time, money, or energy into something we know is a losing proposition simply because we have already incurred or sunk a cost that cannot be recouped. But of course, this can easily become a vicious cycle. The more we invest, the more determined we become to see it through and to see our investment pay off. The more we invest in something, the harder it is to let go. Have you ever continued to invest time or effort in a non-essential project instead of cutting your losses? Have you ever continued to pour money into an investment that wasn't panning out instead of walking away? Have you ever kept plodding down a dead end because you could not admit I shouldn't have pursued this direction in the first place? Ever been stuck in a cycle of throwing good money after bad? A non-essentialist can't break free of traps like these. An essentialist has the courage and confidence to admit his or her mistakes and uncommit, no matter the sunk cost. Tom Stafford describes a simple antidote to the endowment effect. Instead of asking, how much do I value this item, we should ask, if I did not own this item, how much would I pay to obtain it? We can do the same for opportunities and commitment. Don't ask, how will I feel if I miss out on this opportunity? But rather, if I did not have this opportunity, how much would I be willing to sacrifice in order to obtain it? Similarly, we can ask, if I wasn't already involved in this project, how hard would I work to get on it? It's natural not to want to let go of what we wasted on a bad choice, but when we don't, we doom ourselves to keep wasting even more. Instead, admit failure to begin success. Only when we admit we have made a mistake in committing to something can we make a mistake a part of our past. When we remain in denial, on the other hand, we continue to circle pointlessly. There should be no shame in admitting to a mistake. After all, we really are only admitting that we are now wiser than we once were. When we get so emotionally hung up on trying to force something that is not the right fit, we can often benefit from a sounding board. Someone who is not emotionally involved in the situation and unaffected by the choice we make can give us the permission to stop forcing something that is clearly not working out. The tendency to continue doing something simply because we have always done it is sometimes called the status quo bias. One cure for the status quo bias is borrowed from the world of accounting. Apply zero-based budgeting. Typically, when accountants allocate a budget, they use last year's budget as the baseline for the next year's projection. But with zero-based budgeting, they use zero as the baseline. In other words, every item in the proposed budget must be justified from scratch. You can apply zero-based budgeting to your own endeavors. Instead of trying to budget your time on the basis of existing commitments, assume that all bets are off. All previous commitments are gone. Then begin from scratch, asking which you would add today. It might sound obvious, but pausing for just 5 seconds before offering your services can greatly reduce the possibility of making a commitment you'll regret. Before the words, "That sounds great, I'd love to," fly out your mouth, ask yourself, is this essential? In a reverse pilot, you test whether removing an initiative or activity will have any negative consequences. Are there commitments you routinely make to customers, colleagues, friends, or even family members that you have always assumed made a big difference to them, but in fact they might barely notice? By quietly eliminating or at least scaling back an activity for a few days or weeks, you might be able to assess whether it is really making a difference or whether no one really cares. Edit. The invisible art. Editing, which involves the strict elimination of the trivial, unimportant, or irrelevant, is an essentialist craft. Good film editor makes it hard not to see what's important because she eliminates everything but the elements that absolutely need to be there. In life, disciplined editing can help add to your level of contribution. It increases your ability to focus on and give energy to the things that really matter. It lends the most meaningful relationships and activities more space to blossom. Editing aids the effortless execution of the essentialist by removing anything distracting or unnecessary or awkward. Or as one book editor put it, "My job is to make life as effortless as possible for the reader. But the goal is to help the reader have the clearest possible understanding of the most important message." For an author, whether of films, books, or journalism, It is easy to get overly committed to a certain idea or body of work, especially when you slaved over. It can be quite painful to eliminate passages, pages, or even chapters that took weeks, months, maybe even years to write in the first place. Yet such disciplined elimination is critical to the craft. The Latin root of the word decision, cis or cid, literally means to cut or to kill. You can see this in words like scissors, homicide, or fratricide. As Alan D. Williams observed in the essay What is an Editor, there are two basic questions the editor should be addressing to the author. Are you saying what you want to say? And are you saying it as clearly and concisely as possible? Condensing means saying it as clearly and concisely as possible. To apply the principle of condensing to our lives, we need to shift the ratio of activity to meaning. We need to eliminate multiple meaningless activities and replace them with one very meaningful activity. Becoming an editor in our lives also includes knowing when to show restraint. One way we can do this is by editing our tendency to step in. When we are added onto an email thread, for example, we can resist our usual temptation to be the first to reply all. When sitting in a meeting, we can resist the urge to add our 2 cents. We can wait. We can observe. We can see how things develop. Doing less is not just a powerful essentialist strategy, it's a powerful editorial one as well. Limit. The freedom of setting boundaries. The disappearance of boundaries is typical of our non-essentialist era. For one thing, of course, technology has completely blurred the lines between work and family. These days, there don't seem to be any boundaries at all regarding when people expect us to be available to work. Non-essentialists tend to think of boundaries as constraints or limits, things that get in the way of their hyper-productive life. To a non-essentialist, setting boundaries is evidence of weakness. If they are strong enough, they think they don't need boundaries. They can cope with it all. They can do it all. But without limits, they eventually become spread so thin that getting anything done becomes virtually impossible. Essentialists, on the other hand, see boundaries as empowering. They recognize that boundaries protect their time from being hijacked and often free them from the burden of having to say no to things that further others' objectives instead of their own. They know that clear boundaries allow them to proactively eliminate the demands and encumbrances from others that distract them from the true essentials. Don't rob people of their problems. I'm not saying we should never help people. We should serve and love and make a difference in the lives of others, of course. But when people make their problem our problem, we aren't helping them, we're enabling them. Once we take their problem for them, all we're doing is taking away their ability to solve it. Boundaries are a source of liberation. This truth is demonstrated elegantly by the story of a school located next to a busy road. At first, the children played only on a small swath of the playground, close to the building where the grown-ups could keep their eyes on them. But then someone constructed a fence around the playground. Now the children were able to play anywhere and everywhere on the playground. Their freedom, in effect, more than doubled. Execute. How to make execution effortless. While non-essentialists tend to force execution, essentialists invest the time they have saved by eliminating the non-essentials into designing a system to make execution almost effortless. Execute. How to make execution effortless. While non-essentialists tend to force execution, essentialists invest the time they have saved by eliminating the non-essentials into designing a system to make execution almost effortless. Buffer. The unfair advantage. The only thing we can expect with any great certainty is the unexpected. Therefore, we can either wait for the moment and react to it, or we can prepare. We can create a buffer. A buffer can be defined literally as something that prevents two things from coming into contact and harming each other. For example, a buffer zone at the periphery of a protected environmental area is an area of land that is used to create extra space between that area and any potential threats that might infiltrate it. The non-essentialist tends to always assume a best-case scenario. We all know those people, and many of us, myself included, have been that person who chronically underestimate how long something will really take. The essentialist looks ahead. She plans. She prepares for different contingencies. She expects the unexpected. She creates a buffer to prepare for the unforeseen, thus giving herself some wiggle room when things come up, as they inevitably do. In filtering out 7 companies from 20,400, the authors found that the ones that executed most successfully did not have any better ability to predict the future than their less successful counterparts. Instead, they were the ones who acknowledged they could not predict the unexpected and therefore prepared better. Have you ever underestimated how long a task will take? If you have, you are far from alone. The term for this very common phenomenon is the planning fallacy. This term, coined by Daniel Kahneman in 1979, refers to people's tendency to underestimate how long a task will take, even when they have actually done the task before. In one study, 37 students were asked how long they thought it would take them to complete their thesis. When the students were asked to estimate how long it would take if everything went as well as it possibly could, their averaged estimate was 27 days. When they were asked how long it would take if everything went as poorly as it possibly could, their averaged estimate was 48.6 days. In the end, the average time it actually took the students was 55.5 days. Only 30% of the students completed the task in the time they had estimated. Curiously, people will admit to having a tendency to underestimate while simultaneously believing their current estimates are accurate. One study found that if people estimated anonymously how long it would take to complete a task, they were no longer guilty of the planning fallacy. This implies that often we actually know we can't do things in a given time frame, but we don't want to admit it to someone. One way to protect against this is simply to add a 50% buffer to the amount of time we estimate it will take to complete a task or project. If 50% seems overly generous, consider how frequently things actually do take us 50% longer than expected. Think of the most important projects you are trying to get done at work or at home. Then ask the following 5 questions. 1. What risks do you face on this project? 2. What is the worst case scenario? 3. What would the social effects of this be? 4. What would the financial impact of this be? And 5. How can you invest to reduce risks or strengthen financial or social resilience? Your answer to that 5th and crucial question will point you to buffers. Subtract. Bring forth more by removing obstacles. What is the obstacle that is keeping you back from achieving what really matters to you? By systematically identifying and removing this constraint, you'll be able to significantly reduce the friction keeping you from executing what is essential. Essentialists don't default to band-aid solutions. Instead of looking for the most obvious or immediate obstacles, they look for the ones slowing down progress. They ask, what is getting in the way of achieving what is essential? While the non-essentialist is busy applying more and more pressure and piling on more and more solutions, the essentialist simply makes a one-time investment in removing obstacles. This approach goes beyond just solving problems. It's a method of reducing your efforts to maximize your results. An essentialist produces more, brings forth more, by removing more instead of doing more. Instead of focusing on the efforts and resources we need to add, the essentialist focuses on the constraints or obstacles we need to remove. But how? 1. Be clear about the essential intent. We can't know what obstacles to remove until we are clear on the desired outcome. When we don't know what we're really trying to achieve, all change is arbitrary. So ask yourself, how will we know when we are done? 2. Identify the slowest hiker. Instead of just jumping into the project, take a few minutes to think. Ask yourself, what are all the obstacles standing between me and getting this done, and what is keeping me from completing this? Make a list of these obstacles. They might include not having the information you need, your energy level, your desire for perfection. Prioritize the list using the question, what is the obstacle that, if removed, would make the majority of other obstacles disappear? 3. Remove the obstacle. Let's say your slowest hiker turns out to be your desire to make the report perfect. There may be dozens of ideas you have to make the report better, but in this case your essential intent is to send off the draft. So to remove the obstacle, you need to replace the idea "this has to be perfect or else" with "done is better than perfect." Give yourself permission not to have it polished in the first draft. By removing the primary obstacle, you have made every other aspect of the job easier. Progress. The power of small wins. Every day do something that will inch you closer to a better tomorrow. Doug Firebuff. The way of the non-essentialist is to go big on everything, to try to do it all, have it all, fit it all in. The non-essentialist operates under the false logic that the more he strives, the more he will achieve, but the reality is, the more we reach for the stars, the harder it is to get ourselves off the ground. The way of the essentialist is different. Instead of trying to accomplish it all, and all at once, and flaring out, the essentialist starts small and celebrates progress. Instead of going for the big, flashy wins that don't really matter, the essentialist pursues small and simple wins in areas that are essential. When we want to create major change, we often think we need to lead with something huge or grandiose, like the executive I knew who announced with great fanfare that he had decided to build his daughters an elaborate doll's house, but then because his visions for it were so large and ambitious, abandoned the project as too burdensome. There is an appealing logic to this, that to do something big, we have to start big. However, just think of all the big, hyped-up initiatives in organizations that never ended up amounting to anything, just like that executive's doll's house. Instead of starting big and then flaring out with nothing to show for it, other than time and energy wasted, to really get essential things done, we need to start small and build momentum. Then we can use that momentum to work towards the next win, and then the next one, and so on, until we have a significant breakthrough. And when we do, our progress will have become so frictionless and effortless that the breakthrough will seem like overnight success. Quote, "My experience has taught me this about how people and organizations improve. The best place to look is for small changes we could make in the things we do often. There is power in steadiness and repetition." Unquote. The Stanford prison experiment is legendary, and much has been written about its many implications. But what I wondered was this: if simply being treated in a certain way conditioned these Stanford students gradually to adopt these negative behaviors, could the same kind of conditioning work for more positive behavior too? We can use our energies to set up a system that makes execution of goodness easy, or we can resign ourselves to a system that actually makes it harder to do what is good. We introduced a token system. The children were given 10 tokens at the beginning of the week. These could each be traded in for either 30 minutes of screen time or 50 cents at the end of the week, adding up to $5 or 5 hours of screen time a week. If a child read a book for 30 minutes, he or she would earn an additional token, which could also be traded in for screen time or for money. The results were incredible. Overnight, screen time went down 90%, reading went up by the same amount, and the overall effort we had to put into policing this system went way, way down. In other words, non-essential activity dramatically decreased and essential activity dramatically increased. Once a small amount of initial effort was invested to set up the system, it worked without friction. We can all create systems like this, both at home and at work. The key is to start small, encourage progress, and celebrate small wins. A popular idea in Silicon Valley is "done is better than perfect." The sentiment is not that we should produce rubbish. The idea, as I read it, is not to waste time on non-essentials and just to get the thing done. In entrepreneurial circles, the idea is expressed as creating a minimal viable product. The idea is, what is the simplest possible product that will be useful and valuable to the intended customer? For example, when I was still in the exploratory mode of the book, before I'd even begun to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, I would share a short idea, my minimal viable product, on Twitter. If it seemed to resonate with people there, I would write a blog piece on Harvard Business Review. Through this iterative process, which required very little effort, I was able to find where there seemed to be a connection between what I was thinking and what seemed to have the highest relevancy in other people's lives. As John Lasseter, the chief creative officer at Pixar and now Disney, said, "We don't actually finish our films, we release them." There are two opposing ways to approach an important goal or deadline. You can start easy and small or start late and big. Late and big means doing it all at the last minute, pulling an all-nighter and making it happen. Early and small means starting at the earliest possible moment with a minimal possible time investment. Often just 10 minutes invested in a project or assignment 2 weeks before it is due can save you much frantic and stressed out scrambling at the 11th hour. Take a goal or deadline you have coming up and ask yourself, what is the minimal amount I could do right now to prepare? Flow, the genius of routine. Routine, in an intelligent man, is a sign of ambition. W.H. Auden. For years before the Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps won the gold at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, he followed the same routine at every race. Phelps explained, "It's just a routine, my routine. It's a routine I've gone through my whole life. I'm not going to change it." And that is that. His coach, Bob Bowman, designed this physical routine with Phelps. The way of the non-essentialist is to think the essentials only get done when they are forced, that execution is a matter of raw effort alone. You labor to make it happen. You push through. The way of the essentialist is different. The essentialist designs a routine that makes achieving what you have identified as essential to the default position. Yes, in some instances, an essentialist still has to work hard, but with the right routine in place, each effort yields exponentially greater results. Routine is one of the most powerful tools for removing obstacles. Without routine, the pull of non-essential distractions will overpower us. But if we create a routine that enshrines the essentials, we will begin to execute them on autopilot. Instead of our consciously pursuing the essential, it will happen without our having to think about it. We won't have to expend precious energy every day prioritizing everything. We must simply expend a small amount of initial energy to create the routine, and then all that is left to do is follow it. And there is a huge body of scientific research to explain the mechanism by which routine enables difficult things to become easy. One simplified explanation is that as we repeatedly do a certain task, the neurons or nerve cells make new connections through communication gateways called synapses. With repetition, the connections strengthen and it becomes easier for the brain to activate them. There is another cognitive advantage to routine as well. Once the mental work shifts to the basal ganglia, mental space is freed up to concentrate on something new. This allows us to autopilot the execution of one essential activity while simultaneously actively engaging in another without sacrificing our level of focus or contribution. The right routines can actually enhance innovation and creativity by giving us the equivalent of an energy rebate. Instead of spending our limited supply of discipline on making the same decisions again and again, embedding our decisions into our routine allows us to channel that discipline towards some other essential activity. According to researchers at Duke University in North Carolina, nearly 40% of our choices are deeply unconscious. We don't think about them in the usual sense. There is both danger and opportunity in this. The opportunity is that we can develop new abilities that eventually become instinctive. The danger is that we may develop routines that are counterproductive. Without being fully aware, we can get caught in non-essential habits, like checking our email the second we get out of bed every morning, or picking up a donut on the way home from work each day, or spending our lunch hour trolling the internet instead of using the time to think, reflect, recharge, or connect with friends and colleagues. If we want to change our routine, we don't really need to change the behavior. Rather, we need to find the cue that is triggering the non-essential activity or behavior and find a way to associate that same cue with something that is essential. So for example, if the bakery you passed on the way home from work triggers you to pick up a donut, next time you pass by that bakery, use that cue to remind you to pick up a salad from the deli across the street. Create new triggers. If the goal is to create some behavioral change, we're not just confined to our existing cues, we can create brand new ones to trigger the execution of some essential routine. Develop a routine of doing your hardest task of the day first thing in the morning. Find a cue, whether it's that first glass of orange juice you have at your desk, or an alarm you set on your mobile phone, or anything you're already accustomed to doing first thing in the morning, to trigger you to sit down and focus on your hardest thing. It's true that doing the same things at the same time day after day can get boring. To avoid this kind of routine fatigue, there is no reason why you can't have different routines for different days of the week. Focus. What's important now? Larry has a fundamentally essentialist approach to winning and losing. As he tells his players, there is a difference between losing and being beaten. Being beaten means that they are better than you. They are faster, stronger, and more talented. To Larry, losing means something else. It means you lost focus. It means you didn't concentrate on what was essential. It is all based on a simple but powerful idea. To operate at your highest level of contribution requires that you deliberately tune in to what is important in the here and now. Think about how this might apply in your own life. Have you ever become trapped reliving past mistakes over and over like a video player stuck in endless replay? Do you spend time and energy worrying about the future? Do you spend more time thinking about the things you can't control rather than the things you can control about the areas where your efforts matter? Do you ever find yourself busy trying to prepare mentally for the next meeting, or the next assignment, or the next chapter in your life, rather than being fully present in the current one? It's natural and human to obsess over past mistakes or feel stress about what may be ahead of us. Yet every second spent worrying about a past or future moment distracts us from what is important in the here and now. Non-essentialists tend to be so preoccupied with past successes and failures, as well as future challenges and opportunities, that they miss the present moment. They become distracted, unfocused. They aren't really there. The way of the essentialist is to tune into the present. What we can't do is concentrate on two things at the same time. When I talk about being present, I'm not talking about doing only one thing at a time. I'm talking about being focused on one thing at a time. Multitasking itself is not the enemy of essentialism. Pretending we can multi-focus is. When faced with so many tasks and obligations that you can't figure out which to tackle first, stop. Take a deep breath. Get present in the moment and ask yourself what is most important this very second, not what's most important tomorrow or even an hour from now. If you're not sure, make a list of everything vying for your attention and cross off anything that is not important right now. Getting the future out of your head enables you to more fully focus on what is important now. In this case, my next step was to sit down and list those things that might have been essential, just not right now. Now, as he gets to the door of his house, he applies what he calls the pause that refreshes. This technique is easy. He stops for just a moment. He closes his eyes. He breathes in and out once, deeply and slowly. As he exhales, he lets the work issues fall away. This allows him to walk through the front door to his family with more singleness of purpose. It supports the sentiment attributed to Lao Tzu. In work, do what you enjoy. In family life, be completely present. B. The Essentialist Life. It is impossible to argue with the statement that Gandhi lived a life that really mattered. Of course, we don't have to try to replicate Gandhi to benefit from his example as someone who lived fully and completely as an essentialist. We can all purge our lives of the non-essential and embrace the way of the essentialist in our own ways and in our own time and on our own scale. We can all live a life not just of simplicity, but of high contribution and meaning. There are two ways of thinking about essentialism. The first is to think of it as something you do occasionally. The second is to think of it as something you are. In the former, essentialism is one more thing to add to your already overstuffed life. In the latter, it is a different way, a simpler way of doing everything. It becomes a lifestyle. It becomes an all-encompassing approach to living and leading. It becomes the essence of who we are. We can find essentialists among the most successful people in every type of human endeavor. These include religious leaders, journalists, politicians, lawyers, doctors, investors, athletes, authors, artists. These people make their greatest contribution in many different ways, but they share one trait. They don't just give lip service to the idea of less but better. They have deliberately chosen to fully embrace the way of the essentialist. Regardless of what job, field, or industry we are in, we can all choose to do the same. When we look back on our careers and our lives, would we rather see a long laundry list of quote-unquote accomplishments that don't really matter, or just a few major accomplishments that have real meaning and significance? Once you become an essentialist, you will find that you aren't like everybody else. When other people are saying yes, you will find yourself saying no. When other people are doing, you will find yourself thinking. When other people are speaking, you will find yourself listening. When other people are in the spotlight vying for attention, you will find yourself waiting on the sidelines until it is time to shine. While other people are padding their resumes and building out their LinkedIn profiles, you will be building a career of meaning. While other people are complaining, read bragging, about how busy they are, you will just be smiling sympathetically, unable to relate. While other people are living a life of stress and chaos, you will be living a life of impact and fulfillment. In many ways, to live as an essentialist in our too many things all the time society is an act of quiet revolution. I'll be the first to admit that transition doesn't happen overnight. Still, over time I found it gets easier and easier. Saying no feels less uncomfortable. Decisions get much clearer. Eliminating the non-essentials becomes more natural and instinctive. I feel greater control of my choices to the point that my life is different. If you open your heart and mind to embrace essentialism fully, these things will become true for you as well. You will experience a reordering of what really matters. Life will become less about efficiently crossing off what was on your to-do list or rushing through everything on your schedule, and more about changing what you put on there in the first place. Every day becomes more clear than the day before how the essential things are so much more important than the next most important thing in line. As a result, the execution of those essentials becomes more and more effortless. You will gain confidence in your ability to pause, to push back, or not rush in. You will feel less and less a function of other people's to-do lists and agendas. Remember that if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. The life of an essentialist is a life lived without regret. If you have correctly identified what really matters, if you invest your time and energy in it, then it is difficult to regret the choices you make. You become proud of the life you have chosen to live. Will you choose to live a life of purpose and meaning, or will you look back on your one single life with twinges of regret? If you take one thing away from this book, I hope you will remember this. Whatever decision or challenge or crossroads you face in your life, simply ask yourself, what is essential? Eliminate everything else. If you are ready to look inside yourself for the answer to this question, then you are ready to commit to the way of the essentialist. Appendix: Leadership Essentials. Clarity equals success. This is just one of the many reasons that the principle of less but better is just as useful in building teams that can make a difference as it is in enabling individuals to live a life that really matters. Be ridiculously selective in hiring people. A non-essentialist tends to hire people frantically and impulsively, then gets too busy or distracted to either dismiss or reskill the people keeping the team back. At first, the hiring bonanza seems justified because of the pace of growth that must be sustained. But in reality, one wrong hire is far costlier than being one person short. And the cost of hiring too many wrong people, and one wrong hire often leads to multiple wrong hires because the wrong person will tend to attract more wrong people, is what Guy Kawasaki called a bozo explosion, a term he uses to describe what happens when a formerly great team or company descends into mediocrity. Debate until you have established a really clear, not pretty clear, essential intent. Without clarity of purpose, non-essentialist leaders straddle their strategy. They try to pursue too many objectives and do too many things. As a result, their teams get spread in a million directions and make little progress in any. The non-essentialist disempowers people by allowing ambiguity over who is doing what. Often this is justified in the name of wanting to be a flexible or agile team, but what is actually created is a counterfeit agility. When people don't know what they are really responsible for and how they will be judged on their performance, when decisions either are or appear to be capricious, and when roles are ill-defined, it isn't long before people either give up or, worse, become obsessed with trying to look busy and therefore important instead of actually getting any real work done. An essentialist understands that clarity is the key to empowerment. He doesn't allow roles to be general and vague. He ensures that everyone in the team is really clear about what they are expected to contribute and what everyone else is contributing. Non-essentialist communication usually is either too general to be actionable or changes so quickly that people are always caught off guard. Essentialist leaders, on the other hand, communicate the right things to the right people at the right time. Essentialist leaders speak succinctly, opting for restraint in their communication to keep the team focused. When they do speak, they are crystal clear.